please be standing and welcome the marvellous Lord Alan Sugar, everybody. I didn't quite get that reaction, Lord Sugar. First of all, thank you so much for coming down. Really appreciate it. Obviously, this is a National Enterprise Challenge for the youth of today. So I guess the first logical place to start before we let the young people ask questions themselves is what age did you get into business and what made you realise that business was the path you wanted to take?
Yeah, funny enough, this is just down the road from here. This is Commercial Road, and at the end of this road, we get to near where the docks are. And my very, very, very first customer of what was known as Amstrad was just round the corner here. And I sold him some car aerials at the age of, I think it was just about 17 and a half. He was my very first customer. Not that it's going to make any difference to this lot here, but it was P.W. Thaxton on East India Dock Road. So it's just round the corner there.
There you go. So to succeed in business, you have to have a fantastic memory, apparently. That's phenomenal.
Well, you never forget your first customer, and that was the first trade customer, yeah?
How much did you get for the aerials?
Well, those aerials at the time were, I don't know, £1 or something like that. But I started working for an electrical company, selling electrical goods, and I ended up selling for them and delivering stuff for them, getting paid, and in the end I decided I was going to do it for myself. So I set out one morning one Monday morning and bought 1967, I think it was, a minivan, a second-hand minivan, for £50, which was quite a lot of money in those days. And £8 was spent on insurance, which was still a lot of money in those days, third-party fire and theft. And the other £42 of the £100 investment, I went to a place called, just off of Tottenham Court Road, and bought these car aerials, and from there drove back to some of the existing customers that I knew from my old people, Mr. Thaxton being the first one.
Lovely, from around these ends.
Yeah, and he gave me an order. So that was it. So that's how I started. And from then on, it just sold more and more stuff, buying and selling, and eventually became a manufacturer 5 or 6 years later. And I suppose the rest is history, yeah?
History and present as well, I guess you could say. When you were first building up your business empire, I suppose anyone that's self-employed or creating their own entity, whether it be in the arts or in business, you must have had a point where you just looked back and thought, wow, I've made this. Have you ever had a moment, and you must have millions in your career, but maybe one for our audience today, as a young guy starting out in business, and you just looked and thought, I can't believe I've achieved this. Did you?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask the question as to why did I want to go into business, why I didn't want to just get a job somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I wanted to be self-sufficient. In other words, look after myself.
Yeah.
And I think that had a lot to do with the background, where I came from, where I lived in the council flats, which were, I would say, 5 or 6 miles down the road from here, maybe a little bit more, 6 or 7 miles down the road from here in Hackney.
Yep. And
saw families struggle and people struggle, and I said, well, I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to do it myself, yeah? So to answer your question, there are stages in your life when you decide you've arrived, if you understand what I mean.
Exactly.
And one of those stages was that back in 1967, 68, whenever, around about that time, to earn clear £20 per week was the equivalent of swimming the Channel and climbing Mount Everest. I mean, it was a massive amount of pay.
Yeah.
It was £1,000 a year. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but to put things in perspective for some of the youngsters here, a gallon of petrol in those days, or let's call it, I'll call it a gallon at the moment, and we'll do the maths in a second. But a gallon of petrol in those days was the equivalent of 13p. So that gives you, which would mean the equivalent of something like 3p per litre.
Be like 0.5p for an Xbox or something, wouldn't it?
Like
Yeah.
Well, it would be, yeah. So that gives you kind of perspective of what £20 meant. And coming from a working class family, going into business on my own, I set myself a target in the first weeks to clear £60 per week, which was just like, it's just like astronomical.
Yeah.
And after doing that 3 or 4 times and realizing I could do it, there's a moment where you know you've arrived.
Yeah.
You look around at the other people and you say, look, it has been done, I'm self-sufficient and have arrived. So that's, but like all things in business, you don't want to stop, so you go on and on and on and on and on. You set your targets higher, you know, 1980, I floated that company on the London stock market. Again, not too far down the road from here, but a different bunch of people, of course. It generated a market value for the company of £8 million.
Wow.
That's in 1980, and they gave me a cheque for selling 25% of that company to the public for £2 million. And so there's another kind of milestone of, I think I've arrived now.
Yeah.
You know? And that was in 1980.
If I made £2 million, I'd be pretty happy with myself.
And in 1985, that company was valued on the stock market at £1.4 billion.
Wow.
Right, so you've gone from 1968 to 1985. So there's the kind of milestones of arrival, really.
Wicked. Well, now you've got a sort of idea of your background and your idea in business, I guess you'll be wanting to take some questions from our young business people. So I'm guessing we have loads of people with questions. We'll go down this side. Has anyone this side of the room got a question for us?
What school are you from? Bless William Howard. Okay, and what's your question for Lord Sugar?
My question for Lord Sugar is, Ben McBean earlier was talking about how every single person in their lives has setbacks. My question for you is, which is your biggest setback and how did you retaliate to that?
Wow, that's a good question.
Yeah, in business there's lots of setbacks, you know, the setback that would be completely disastrous is one that wipes you out completely, and where you really are wiped out completely. You just get over it, you know, and you have to take a realistic view. So it's like, I suppose it's like climbing a mountain, if you like, and then getting 3/4 of the way up and then suddenly slipping all the way down. And then you just have to get up and start again. I mean, in the computer industry, there was a disastrous period for me around about the 1990s or something, where we brought out a range of computers, and just to make a long story short, they didn't work. And we'd made hundreds of thousands of them in production, and one of them's over there now. And they didn't work. And that was, you know, it's a bit like, that was the sole product that the company sold, and if you haven't got a new range of products that don't work, that is pretty disastrous. And, you know, it was a difficult time, and we have to pull out of it. So you just have to, you know, be realistic and not give up, because the bottom line is that there's more positive things than setbacks, and in business it is a case of positive and setbacks, and I don't wish to sound big-headed or anything like that, but I'll take every single person in this audience here and put them all together and tell you right now that all of you, in the whole of your lifetime, your cumulative earnings in the whole of your lifetime that in 1 year, I lost that amount of money in one simple year. And you come back from it, you know. So it's, and I remember being on, I remember once, nothing to do, not my fault, but there's something called the stock market, which I'm sure you're aware of. And for reasons that have normally nothing to do with me or anybody else, they decide to crash every so often. And 1 minute your company is worth £1.5 billion, and you wake up one Monday morning and the Chancellor in Germany has got out of bed the wrong side, and he says something nasty to the President of the United States, and the whole stock market crashes, and within 40 minutes, that company worth 1.5 billion is now only worth 500 million. And it was funny enough, one night I was actually had to go on a television program with Terry Wogan.
All right.
Do you remember him?
Yeah. Tell?
Yeah. And it was that day there was the stock market crash, and his opening line to me was, "What's it like? You just lost 700 million pounds today."
Wow.
Right. Well, of course, I hadn't lost anything because I never had it in the beginning. It was a paper fortune, but and that's how it is. You know, you have stock market crashes, and you lose and you gain.
Do you think that your background, like growing up in Hackney and stuff, do you think that's given you a sort of drive that makes you more capable of overcoming things like that?
I think it is, and I'm sorry to say that, you know, that there are very few young people with the ethos that we had then. I think the nearest person I've come to having that kind of ethos is the winner of last year's junior apprentice. She came from a very tough kind of background, and she's a real grafter, you know, she really is. And because she understands that if she doesn't provide things for herself, she's going to get nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Ashley is, you know, there's very few young people like that. That maybe I'm being a bit cruel in the sense that perhaps a lot of people, there are a few, but there's too many out there that are pampered by their parents, you know.
Yeah.
And there's an expectation of possessions that they will get, their iPhones, their Nike trainers, whatever there is, there's Xboxes or Y boxes, whatever they're called.
You need to get a van and start selling aerials, don't they?
No, but the point is, there's no need to, is there really?
Yeah,
if there's no hunger, and that is the problem with the lack of hunger and a different culture that exists, unfortunately.
Well, I'm quite conscious to get through. There must be so many kids dying to get a question in. So you've got someone here. Do you want to do the question?
Yeah, we've got somebody here. Courtney, have you got a question?
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest barriers these days to young people who want to become entrepreneurs?
I think the barriers are created by the people themselves. First thing is you know, a kind of an array of excuses of why you can't do this and why you can't do that. One of the most frequently asked questions of me is, could you do what you did when you were 17, 18 years now? And the answer is yes, absolutely yes, with the ethos and the mind that I have. Not no, because of there's regulations out there and because you can't do this and you can't do that. Of course, I couldn't start an electronics factory now in the same way as I started an electronics factory in a shed, because things have moved on now and the manufacturing of electronic stuff is all in the but I would do something else. So here's the point. The point is this, is that you have to start small, not up there. And I'm afraid to say there are too many young people who aspire to Mr. Zuckerberg or to Mr. Bill Gates, who wish to start up there and think there's this fast track and it's going to happen to them. And that is a 1 trillion to 1 chance that it's ever going to happen to you. So get that in your head, first of all, and you're halfway there. You're halfway there in understanding that these .com revolutions, Google, Facebooks and all this type of stuff are 1 trillion to 1 chances of some young person coming from the school in Hackney or Liverpool or Nottingham or whatever, it's going to happen to you. I'm not saying it won't, but you've got to understand and be realistic that it's not. And so the obstacles are, get out all those things out of your head and be realistic and do something that you enjoy doing, whatever that is. Whether it's window cleaning to make some money and having a window cleaning business, or car cleaning to make some money because you like cars, then you do that. But having aspiration, I mean, some people, you know, ask me sometimes, 16, 17-year-old person jumps out of bed on a Monday morning and says, I want to start an airline. I mean, this is totally unrealistic because they are looking up to Richard Branson, who did do it, and to Mr. Pollis or EasyJet. Different backgrounds and different people. It doesn't work that way. So no obstacles. You've got to have a product, an idea, a service that you want to do, and you've got to, don't expect any handouts from banks, or unless you've got a rich uncle, and you need to start it with some of your own money, like I did, and you'd be surprised how careful and cautious you are, and you have to be very determined. There's no obstacles whatsoever.
There you go. We're going to get anyone else? Have we got someone already primed on the microphone?
I've got someone here. Jack from Brighouse. Hello, Jack. What do you want to ask Lord Sugar?
What is the best piece of business advice that you've ever been given?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I understand why you've asked it. And I don't think I've ever been. I think the best bit of advice I've been given didn't come as advice. It came more as criticism, really, and it follows on from. Don't expect the bank to bankroll you, because if you know, they're going to give you any money if there's nothing in it for them. You know, I think that's basically it. So I always used to keep track of my assets. You know, and that example I gave you the other day, I gave you just now about the £60 per week. It was a meticulous calculation on an ongoing basis every day as to how much I bought that glass for and how much I sold it for, and you take one away from t'other and realise that you've made X amount of money, but someone would say to me, but you've got a vehicle, you've got a car, you've got some petrol you've put into it, or you've got some maintenance, that car's going to break down one day. You've got to make some provisions for all that stuff. So that's the kind of very, very simple, basic advice. It was always the best advice. Very simple and basic advice.
Keep it simple, be meticulous.
Yeah, I mean, what you might think is obvious, but believe it or not, people get distracted, and particularly in the dot-com boom of 1999 and 2000, with these people that went along to banks and raised lots of money on some whim of an idea, of an internet idea, and they just never kept an eye on the balance sheet, and they went bust very quickly.
Well, I mean, obviously, perfect example of that is like, we don't want to talk about the apprentice too much. Obviously, you're conscious of business because that's what these people are here for today. But every time I see someone getting pulled into the boardroom, there's always a simple detail that they've missed, and that's always the thing that you pick them up on, and that's always where, in my opinion, the hilarity begins. But yeah, it's always those small little things that go wrong.
I mean, in commerce, there's no real rocket science, really. It's about the bottom line, the profits, and your costs and your overheads. There's no rocket science there.
Okay, well, we've got time for a couple more questions before we start the awards, trying to keep it as brief as possible. We've got one down here.
Okay, we've got Savannah from St. Peter's Collegiate.
Ben McBean has inspired our questions too. He said earlier that it's about your ability, not your disability. What would you say is your best ability or attribute?
I think focus, determination, concentration and hard work, not giving up. I think with that combination of those things, you can't go too far wrong.
Wicked. Another one, we got someone...
Yeah.
Okay,
okay. All right, we've got a question. What's your name?
Grace,
Okay, Grace, what's your question for Lord Sugar?
if you could create a dream business and if you could create any dream business in the world, what would your reason for this business be and why?
Well, I mean, I've spent 45 years in technology, and it's very, very difficult for you to understand this because you've been brought, I don't know how old you are, but you've been brought up with iPads and mobile phones and all this type of stuff. And when you go back all of those years, 45 years ago, getting back to the day I was selling those car aerials, these things, if I was to say that there would be these things available then, people would have locked me up and put me in the hospital around the corner because they would thought I would be dreaming. And to watch that move in technology over the years, and I'm just wondering where we're going to go next, what we can do next. My dream business is really to have, you know, a next consumer electronic product that becomes another massive epidemic hit. Now, I have no idea what that is, but that would be something that would interest me.
Okay, so we've got Jade from Wolfstanton High School.
Bruce Forsyth was criticised in the news recently for saying that under-16s shouldn't be put through the tough challenge of being judged for their talent. Does this apply to business?
I think I understand what Bruce Forsyth was saying. I think he meant that television programme where very young children came on stage and were put under a tremendous amount of stress. I mean, that's a completely separate issue here. I believe that there's, you know, around the age of, I was always very enterprising from the age of 14 or 15, 16, always very enterprising, selling things, buying and selling things, that was in me. There was no pressure put on me to do that by anybody. In fact, if anything, there was, people would look back in awe of this young person doing it. So I think it's a completely different scenario there. There's one thing, being forced to be a sports person and forced to do something, or forced to sing, or forced to do something like that by peer pressure. And there's another thing of wanting to do it yourself and excel in business. And I think they're two different things.
Do you think, having done, for example, the apprentice and younger apprentice, but just generally speaking, do you think there's different skill set and characteristics you need to be a young entrepreneur as opposed to a more experienced one?
No, I think it's in you. It's built in you, and it starts to show. I mean, my headmaster in the school, here I go again, maybe 5 or 6 miles down the road here, I was always in the engineering and science stream at school from the age of, you know, when you go to the secondary school, you get there at about 11 or 12, and right the way through the course of that, final bit of education up to 16, he was absolutely convinced that I was in the commerce division.
Yeah.
Where in fact I used to correct him all the time when he used to see me and say, no, I'm in science and engineering. And no, he would nod his head. And the reason was because he formed his opinion of me assisting in enterprising things at school, selling things at the school fetes or whatever was going on as you do at school. Yeah. And I obviously always used to excel as the top salesman or the person that would come up with some ideas. And it's in you, you see. And despite what you might be told by people about being able to go to Boots and buy a bottle of entrepreneur juice.
That's my favourite flavour, that one.
You can't. It's, and it's there, and all someone can do is bring it out of you. And it's a bit like, how can I explain it simply? If you locked me in a room for a year with a piano teacher, I guess that I could play some music and knock out a song or two.
You sell the piano.
Would I ever be a concert pianist? Never in a million trillion years. And that's because I don't have the talent for it. And it is the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. You can't teach entrepreneurial spirit. You've either got it or you haven't.
I guess there's a mathematician who talks about when he talks about Mozart playing the piano, and he talks about when when he can't play music, but when he sees numbers, he can just play. And I guess that's the same with you when you see a business opportunity.
Yeah, we see things clearer. I personally see things very, very clear, very black and white, very clear, very quickly. Others perhaps don't, and that's part of being an entrepreneur, part of having entrepreneurial spirit. The development and the design and the trends of products came to me very, very, very easily.
Hopefully a lot of our young entrepreneurs tonight will feel like they've got that same drive.
So let's have another one.
One more quickly before we go.
Okay, Amy here from Heighton Arts. What's your question?
As a leader, what would you do to become a better leader?
Well, I suppose there's always ways of improving your leadership skills. I mean, mine have never been the most polite and lovey-dovey, kissy-kissy, huggy-huggy type of methods. But see, what it's endorsed by the fact that I have people, in fact, last week I presented an award to a gentleman that has worked for me for 40 years. I've got people that work for me, average people that work for me 25, 15 years, and so I can't be that bad. And the reason is because you've got to be fair. Firm, but fair. And I think most people appreciate a boss that's firm and fair and gives clear, specific direction. And most people, that's what they want. They want direction. They want to know what to do, and then they want to be told afterwards whether they did it right or they did it wrong. So I don't know how I would improve upon that. I don't think I personally ever would, because my method of dealing with things is to keep it very simple set people there what they've got to do and let them get on with it.
There you have it. No need for improvement, and I couldn't disagree. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Lord Alan Sugar.